The blazing New Mexico sun had vanished behind a curtain of dark clouds as Willow Thompson struggled to keep her footing on the rain-slicked path. One misstep was all it took. Her boots skidded on the muddy edge, and before she could catch herself, she was tumbling down the steep ravine, her screams echoing through the canyon as she crashed through brush and bounced off rock before landing with a sickening thud at the bottom. Yancy Alderson had been tracking a stray calf when the storm hit. The 30-year-old cowboy was making his way back to Chisholm Ranch when he heard the scream. He reined in his horse, listening intently as the sound rippled across the landscape. Following the echo, he arrived at the edge of the ravine and peered down to see a woman lying motionless among the rocks, her dress splayed around her like a broken flower. "Hello down there," he called, removing his hat as raindrops began to fall more heavily. "Are you alive, madam?" A groan rose from below, followed by movement as the woman struggled to sit up. Relief flooded through him. At least she wasn't dead. He could see now that she was a full-figured woman with auburn hair that had come loose from its pins, tumbling around her shoulders as she looked up. "I'm stuck down here," she called back, her voice trembling. "I can't climb up. The sides are too steep." Yancy assessed the ravine, a good 20 feet deep with walls of loose shale and dirt made slippery by the rain. Most people would have trouble scaling it, but for someone of her size it would be impossible. "Don't you worry, madam, I'll get you out," he called down, already formulating a plan. "Are you hurt?" "My ankle," she replied, wincing as she touched it. "I think it's just twisted, not broken. But She hesitated, embarrassment coloring her words. "I'm too heavy to climb up, even if my ankle wasn't injured." "Stay put. I'll rig something," Yancy said, turning to his horse. Thunder rolled across the sky as Yancy worked quickly, unwinding the long coil of rope he kept tied to his saddle. He fashioned a sturdy harness, using knots he'd learned during his years working cattle. His horse, Dust Devil, was trained for roping and dragging. The animal would be strong enough to help pull a woman up from the ravine. He secured one end of the rope around a boulder and to his saddle horn, then tossed the other end down to her, calling out instructions. "I'm sending down a rope with a loop. Put it under your arms and across your chest. I'll use my horse to help pull you up, but you'll need to help by pushing with your good leg when you can." Willow stared up at the cowboy silhouetted against the darkening sky. Rain plastered her dress to her body as she struggled to her feet, putting weight only on her good ankle. At 26, she'd spent her entire life being judged for her size. She'd heard every cruel comment imaginable, had seen the sidelong glances and snickers behind hands. And now here she was, trapped in a ravine because she was too heavy to climb out, dependent on a stranger's help. When the rope snaked down beside her, she grabbed it with trembling hands. Her cheeks burned with humiliation as she fitted the loop around her chest and under her arms as instructed. "It's secure," she called up, trying to keep the tremble from her voice. "Hold tight," Yancy shouted back. "I'm going to take up the slack first." He clicked to his horse, guiding Dust Devil to back up slowly. The rope tightened and Yancy watched carefully as the slack disappeared. When he felt resistance, he called down again. "I'm going to start pulling now. Use your good leg to help push off when you can." Willow felt the rope go taut, digging into her flesh as she was lifted slightly off the ground. The cowboy was being as gentle as possible, she could tell, but there was no painless way to be hauled up by a rope. She bit her lip to keep from crying out as she was slowly dragged up the first few feet of the ravine wall. Rain streamed down her face, mixing with tears of pain and embarrassment. Loose rock and mud slid beneath her as she scrambled with her good leg to help push herself upward. Her hands gripped the rope above her head, and she used whatever leverage she could find on the canyon wall. Halfway up, the rope slipped, dropping her a terrifying foot before catching again. Willow couldn't hold back a scream as her injured ankle struck a jutting rock. "I've got you," Yancy called, his voice strained with effort. "Just a little more," he urged his horse back another step, muscles burning in his arms as he helped guide the rope. The woman was heavier than he'd estimated, but Dust Devil was steady, and Yancy's determination was unwavering. He would not let her fall. After what seemed like an eternity, Willow's hands appeared at the edge of the ravine, fingers digging desperately into the mud. Yancy quickly secured the rope and rushed to the edge, reaching down to grasp her wrists. "I've got you now," he said, his voice gentle but firm as he pulled. "Almost there." With one final heave, he pulled her over the edge and onto solid ground. They both collapsed onto the wet earth, breathing heavily as the rain pounded down around them. Willow lay on her back, eyes closed, feeling the rain wash away some of the mud that covered her. The pain in her ankle throbbed, but it was nothing compared to the burning shame that filled her chest. She couldn't look at her rescuer. "Thank you," she whispered, the words nearly lost in the sound of the storm. Yancy sat up, pushing wet hair from his eyes as he studied the woman. Despite the mud and the disheveled state of her clothing, he could see she was pretty, with delicate features that contrasted with her fuller figure. Her eyes, when she finally opened them, were a startling green. "Name's Yancy Alderson," he said, offering a rain-soaked hand. "I work at Chisholm Ranch, and you are Willow Thompson," she replied, taking his hand briefly. "I'm the new school teacher. I was on my way to town when the storm hit." "I took what I thought was a shortcut," she laughed bitterly. "Clearly I was wrong. Well, Miss Thompson, let's get you somewhere dry and have that ankle looked at." Yancy stood and helped her to sit up. "Can you ride?" Willow looked at his horse doubtfully. "I don't think your horse can carry both of us." Yancy measured his words carefully, not wanting to cause her further embarrassment. "Dust Devil here is the strongest horse in the county. Carried me and a full-grown buck during last hunting season. He can manage just fine." He helped her to her feet, supporting her weight as she hobbled to his horse. With as much dignity as he could offer her, he helped boost her into the saddle, then swung up behind her. It was a tight fit, but the horse showed no signs of strain as Yancy guided him toward the ranch. They rode in silence for several minutes, the rain gradually easing as they traveled. Yancy was acutely aware of Willow's stiff posture, how she tried to shift her weight forward to burden him less. "Chisholm Ranch is just over the next rise," he said, breaking the uncomfortable silence. "My cabin's on the edge of the property. We can stop there first so you can dry off, then I'll take you into town to see the doctor." "You don't have to go to such trouble," Willow protested. "I'm sure I've caused enough inconvenience already." Yancy's voice was firm. "It's no trouble at all, Miss Thompson, and out here we look after our own. You're the new school teacher, which makes you part of this community now." Willow didn't respond, but he felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. As they crested the rise, Chisholm Ranch spread out before them, a collection of buildings centered around a large main house, with corrals and barns scattered around the property. Yancy guided his horse toward a small cabin set apart from the other buildings, smoke curling from its chimney. "Looks like my neighbor kept the fire going," he commented. "Old Silas checks in when I'm out working. Good thing, too, on a day like this." He helped Willow down from the horse, supporting her as she hobbled toward the cabin. Inside, it was simple but neat: a table and 2 chairs, a small cooking area, a bed in the corner with a colorful quilt, and a rocking chair near the stone fireplace where flames crackled welcomingly. "Sit by the fire," Yancy said, helping her to the rocking chair. "I'll find you something dry to wear." Willow sank gratefully into the chair, extending her injured ankle toward the fire's warmth. She watched as Yancy moved around the cabin, gathering a towel and what appeared to be a clean shirt and pair of trousers. "These'll be big on you, but they're dry," he said, handing her the clothes. "I'll step outside while you change. Call when you're decent." Left alone, Willow carefully peeled off her mud-caked dress and petticoats. The cowboy's shirt hung nearly to her knees, and she had to roll the trouser legs up several times, securing them with the belt he'd provided. The clothes smelled of soap and open air. "You can come in now," she called, settling back into the rocking chair. Yancy entered, having removed his wet coat and hat. He carried a basin of water and knelt before her, gently lifting her injured ankle. "May I?" he asked, his hand hovering over her foot. When she nodded, he carefully removed her boot and rolled up the trouser leg to examine her ankle. His touch was surprisingly gentle for hands so weathered by work. "Swollen pretty bad, but I don't think it's broken," he said after a moment. "Let me wrap it for you." He worked efficiently, cleaning the mud from her skin before binding her ankle with strips of clean cloth. Willow watched his bent head, noting the way his dark hair curled when wet, how his brow furrowed in concentration. "Thank you," she said softly. "For everything." Most men wouldn't have. She stopped, unsure how to continue without drawing attention to her size. Yancy looked up, his brown eyes meeting hers directly. "Most men wouldn't have what? Helped someone in trouble. If that's true, then I don't think much of most men." A small smile touched Willow's lips. "You know what I mean." "I do," he acknowledged, finishing with her ankle and sitting back on his heels. "And I think it's a shame if you've been made to feel that your size determines your worth or whether you deserve help." His directness surprised her. Most people pretended not to notice, or worse, made it the subject of jokes or pity. Yancy's straightforward acknowledgement was somehow refreshing. "The world isn't always kind to women who don't fit into neat, dainty packages," she said, her voice steady despite the painful truth of her words. Yancy rose and pulled the second chair close to the fire, sitting across from her. "The world isn't always wise about what makes a person valuable." His gaze was warm, lacking the judgment she was accustomed to seeing. "Now, are you hungry? I can rustle up some food before we head into town." They shared a simple meal of beans, bacon, and cornbread that Yancy prepared with practiced ease. As they ate, Willow found herself relaxing in his company. He told her about the ranch, about coming to New Mexico territory 5 years earlier from Texas, about the community she was joining as the new schoolteacher. "The school's been without a teacher for nearly 6 months," he explained. "The children have been getting by with parents taking turns, but everyone's excited to have a real teacher again." "I hope I can live up to their expectations," Willow said, pushing away her empty plate. "This is my first teaching position." "You'll do fine," Yancy assured her. "The folks here care more about having someone who cares about their children than about credentials." When they'd finished eating, Yancy helped Willow into his spare coat and fashioned a crude crutch from a broken broom handle. The rain had stopped, though the sky remained overcast. "Town's not far," he said as he helped her onto his horse again. "Doc Jenkins is usually in his office this time of day." The town of Chisholm Ranch was small but busy, with a main street lined with the essential businesses of frontier life: a general store, saloon, blacksmith, small hotel, and doctor's office. People moved about their business, many stopping to watch curiously as Yancy rode in with Willow seated in front of him. He helped her down outside the doctor's office, supporting her weight as she hobbled inside. "Doctor." Jenkins, a gray-haired man with spectacles and a kind face, looked up from his desk. "Well now, what have we here?" he asked, rising to greet them. "This is Miss Thompson, the new schoolteacher," Yancy explained. Had a fall into Marshall Ravine, injured her ankle, Miss Thompson. We've been expecting you, the doctor said warmly. Though not in this condition. Come, sit down and let me have a look. As the doctor examined her ankle, confirming Yancy's assessment that it was sprained rather than broken, Willow became aware of whispers from outside. Through the window, she could see several women gathered, glancing in her direction. Word travels fast, Dr. Jenkins said, noting her gaze. By nightfall, everyone will know the new schoolteacher arrived by falling into a ravine and being rescued by Yancy here. Willow's cheeks burned. Wonderful first impression. Could be worse, Yancy said with a slight smile. Could have been rescued by old Sela's. Man hasn't bathed since the war, near as I can tell. Despite herself, Willow laughed, the sound surprising her. It had been a long time since she'd laughed so freely, Doctor. Jenkins finished wrapping her ankle and provided her with a proper crutch. Stay off it as much as possible for a week, he advised, and come back to see me in a few days. As they prepared to leave, a stout woman with graying hair hurried into the office. There you are, she exclaimed. I'm Mabel Foster, head of the school board. We've been so worried when you didn't arrive on yesterday's stage as expected. I'm sorry, Willow began. There was a delay in Santa Fe and then the storm. Mabel waved away her apologies. The important thing is you're here now. Though it seems you've had quite an adventure already. Her eyes took in Willow's borrowed clothes and the crutch. I've prepared a room for you at my boarding house. It's nothing fancy, but it's clean and comfortable. That's very kind, Willow said, but I don't have my things yet. My trunk should be arriving on the next stage. We'll sort all that out, Mabel assured her. For now, let's get you settled. Yancy, who had been standing quietly by the door, stepped forward. I should be getting back to the ranch. Miss Thompson, it was a pleasure meeting you despite the circumstances. Willow turned to him, suddenly reluctant to see him go. I can't thank you enough for your help today, Mr. Alderson. Yancy, he corrected with a smile, and you're welcome, Miss Thompson. Willow, she replied, returning his smile. Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding, perhaps, or the beginning of something neither could yet name. I'll check on you in a few days, Yancy said, replacing his hat. Make sure you're settling in all right. With a nod to Mabel and the doctor, he was gone, leaving Willow staring after him, wondering why the small room suddenly felt emptier without his presence. The boarding house run by Mabel Foster was a two-story structure on the edge of town, painted a cheerful yellow with white trim, and a wraparound porch dotted with rocking chairs. Inside, it was neat and homey, with polished wooden floors and walls adorned with framed samplers bearing inspirational verses. Willow's room was on the first floor on account of your injury, Mabel explained, with a narrow bed, a small desk and chair, a washstand with basin and pitcher, and a window overlooking a garden that would likely be lovely in summer but was now dormant in the late autumn chill. Supper's at 6, Mabel informed her, placing a folded nightgown on the bed. One of the ladies from church brought this over for you to use until your things arrive. There's a dress coming too, though. She paused, her eyes taking in Willow's figure. We may need to make some adjustments. Willow was accustomed to this, the hesitation, the implicit acknowledgement that her size made her an inconvenience, a problem to be solved. I appreciate the loan, she said evenly. I have some skill with a needle myself. Mabel seemed relieved. Well then, I'll leave you to rest. The washroom is at the end of the hall if you'd like to freshen up before supper. Left alone, Willow sank onto the bed, exhaustion suddenly overwhelming her. The day's events played through her mind: the fall, the humiliation of being unable to climb out, Yancy's matter-of-fact assistance without a hint of judgment. He was unlike any man she'd ever met, She shook her head, dispelling the thought. She'd come to Chisholm Ranch to teach, to make a new start away from the pitying looks and whispered comments that had followed her in Kansas City. The last thing she needed was to develop an infatuation with the first kind man she'd encountered. Supper that evening was a subdued affair, with only Willow, Mabel, and two other boarders' elderly sisters who taught piano and embroidery to the town's young ladies. They asked polite questions about Willow's journey and her teaching experience, carefully avoiding any mention of her dramatic arrival or her size, though she caught them exchanging glances when they thought she wasn't looking. By the time she retired to her room, Willow was more determined than ever to prove herself to this town, to show them that her worth as a teacher had nothing to do with her appearance or the embarrassing circumstances of her arrival. The next morning brought sunshine and the arrival of Willow's trunk on the stage. Two young men from the livery stable carried it to her room, both trying not to stare at her as they maneuvered the heavy trunk through the doorway. "School board meeting this afternoon," Mabel announced as Willow joined her for breakfast. "Everyone's anxious to meet you properly. The school term starts Monday, so you'll have tomorrow to prepare." The meeting was held in the town's small church, with Willow seated at the front facing a dozen curious faces, parents and community members who would be entrusting their children to her care. She answered their questions confidently, outlining her teaching philosophy and plans for the curriculum. No one mentioned her fall or rescue, though she caught several people studying her figure when they thought she wasn't looking. As the meeting concluded, a man at the back stood up. He was tall and lean, with a thin mustache and expensive clothing that marked him as someone of means. "Miss Thompson," he said, his voice carrying easily through the room. "I'm Walter Prentice, owner of the Mercantile and president of the town council. On behalf of everyone, let me welcome you to Chisholm Ranch." His smile didn't reach his eyes, though I understand you've already been warmly welcomed by one of our local cowboys. There was a titter of laughter, quickly suppressed. Willow felt heat rise to her cheeks, but kept her expression neutral. "Mr. Alderson was kind enough to assist me after an unfortunate accident," she said evenly. "I'm grateful for his help." "Yes, quite fortunate he was passing by," Prentice continued, his tone suggesting there was something improper about the encounter. "Especially since I understand you spent some time in his cabin before coming to town." Before Willow could respond, Mabel Foster stood up. "Walter Prentice, that's quite enough. Miss Thompson was injured and Mr. Alderson acted as any gentleman would. There was nothing improper about it." Of course," Prentice said, raising his hands in mock surrender. "I merely thought it worth noting that our new school teacher has already formed connections in the community." The implication hung in the air, and Willow felt a flash of anger. This was exactly what she'd come to Chisholm Ranch to escape: the judgment, the insinuations, the way people seemed to think her size made her desperate for male attention. "Mr. Prentice," she said, rising to her feet despite the pain in her ankle, "I came to Chisholm Ranch to teach. My personal life, what little there is of it, is my own affair. I would appreciate it if you and everyone else would focus on my qualifications as an educator rather than on fabricated innuendo." A murmur ran through the room. Prentice's face darkened momentarily before he forced a tight smile. "Merely making conversation, Miss Thompson. No offense intended." "Then none taken," she replied coolly, though they both knew better. As the meeting broke up, several women approached to introduce themselves and offer assistance with setting up the schoolroom. Willow accepted gratefully, recognizing the gesture as a silent rebuke to Prentice's insinuations. Later, as she and Mabel walked slowly back to the boarding house, the older woman sighed. "Don't mind Walter. He thinks being the richest man in town gives him the right to meddle in everyone's business. Does he have children in the school? Willow asked. A son, Gregory, 14 and already showing his father's worst traits. Mabel shook her head. You'll have your hands full there. Willow was mulling over this information when a familiar figure on horseback approached from the direction of the ranch. Her heart gave an unexpected leap as she recognized Yancy. He tipped his hat as he reined in beside them. Afternoon, ladies. Miss Thompson, good to see you up and about. Mr. Alderson, Mabel greeted him. What brings you to town? Supply run for the ranch, he replied, his eyes on Willow. And I wanted to check on our new school teacher. How's the ankle? Improving, Willow said, suddenly aware of how her pulse had quickened. Thank you again for your help. My pleasure. His smile was warm, genuine in a way that Walter Prentice's had not been. I was wondering if you might like a proper tour of the area once you're more mobile. There's some beautiful country around here that you won't want to miss. Before Willow could respond, Mabel jumped in. What a lovely idea. Though perhaps it should wait until after school begins. Miss Thompson will have her hands full with preparations this weekend. Yancy's expression didn't change, but Willow thought she detected a flicker of disappointment in his eyes. Of course. Whenever is convenient for you, Miss Thompson. Perhaps next Saturday, Willow suggested, surprising herself with her boldness. If the weather is favorable, his smile brightened. Saturday it is. I'll call for you around noon if that suits. That would be perfect, she replied, ignoring Mabel's slight frown after he rode away. Mabel sighed. Willow, dear, you should be careful. Yancy Alderson is a fine man, but... But what? Willow asked when Mabel trailed off. But people talk. Walter Prentice has already started his insinuations, and the school board expects a certain level of propriety from their teacher. Willow bristled. I'm merely accepting an offer to see the countryside from someone who's been kind to me. There's nothing improper about that. Of course not, Mabel agreed quickly. It's just that, well, as a woman of that is. A woman of my size, Willow finished flatly. Say what you mean, Mabel. People will assume I'm desperately throwing myself at the first man who showed me attention because women like me can't afford to be choosy. Mabel had the grace to look embarrassed. That's not what I meant. It's exactly what you meant, Willow said, her voice tight with controlled anger. And it's exactly the kind of thinking I came here to escape. I'm a teacher, Mabel. A good one. My size has nothing to do with my abilities or my character, and I won't live my life apologizing for taking up more space than others think I should. She turned and hobbled toward the boarding house, leaving Mabel standing open-mouthed on the street. That night, alone in her room, Willow questioned her decision to come to Chisholm Ranch. Perhaps it had been naive to think a small frontier town would judge her less harshly than the city she'd left behind. Perhaps nowhere would ever see beyond her size to the person she truly was. But then she thought of Yancy, his matter-of-fact assistance, his lack of judgment, the warmth in his eyes when he looked at her. Perhaps there was hope after all. Monday morning dawned clear and crisp. Willow dressed carefully in her best teaching dress, a dark blue cotton with white collar and cuffs that she'd let out and adjusted to fit her figure. Her ankle was much improved, though she still used the crutch to avoid putting too much weight on it. The schoolhouse was a simple one-room building at the edge of town, with rows of wooden desks facing a larger desk and blackboard. A pot-bellied stove in the corner provided heat, and large windows let in plenty of light. Willow arrived early to organize her materials and write a welcome message on the board. At 8 o'clock, children began arriving, 23 in all, ranging from 6-year-old beginners to teenagers completing their education before joining their parents' businesses or ranches. They filed in curiously, some shy, others bold in their assessment of their new teacher. Gregory Prentice was easy to spot, a tall boy with his father's thin features and an air of entitlement as he slouched into a desk at the back. "Good morning," Willow greeted them, standing as straight and tall as her ankle would allow. "I'm Miss Thompson, your new teacher. I'm looking forward to getting to know each of you and helping you learn and grow this year." She proceeded to take attendance, noting each name and face before outlining her expectations and the day's schedule. The younger children were immediately attentive, but she could feel resistance from some of the older ones, particularly Gregory and his two friends. As she turned to write on the blackboard, she heard a snicker from the back of the room. "Miss Thompson," Gregory called out, his voice dripping with false innocence, "is it true you had to be pulled out of a ravine with a rope because you were too fat to climb out?" The room went deadly silent. Willow froze, chalk in hand, her back to the class as she absorbed the blow. She had known something like this would come. Children could be cruel, repeating the whispers they heard at home without understanding the hurt they caused. But knowing didn't make it sting any less. Slowly, she turned to face the class. Gregory was smirking, clearly expecting her to be embarrassed or angry. The other students watched wide-eyed, waiting to see how she would respond. "Yes, Gregory, that's true," she said calmly, meeting his gaze. "I fell into Marshall Ravine during the storm last week and injured my ankle." She gestured to the crutch leaning against her desk. "Mr. Alderson was kind enough to help me out using his rope and horse, since the ravine walls were steep and slippery, and I couldn't climb with my injured ankle." She moved to stand directly in front of his desk. "Would you like to know what I learned from that experience?" Gregory's smirk faltered slightly at her direct approach. "What?" "I learned that accidents can happen to anyone. I learned that asking for help when you need it is a sign of wisdom, not weakness. And I learned that true strength of character is shown in how we treat others in their moments of vulnerability." She looked around the room, including all the students in her gaze. "Those are valuable lessons that can't be found in any textbook." She returned to the front of the room. "Now, let's continue with our lesson. Please open your readers to page 12. There were no further disruptions that morning. At noon, when she dismissed the children for lunch, several of the younger ones lingered, asking questions about her fall and rescue with the innocent curiosity of children rather than malice. "Was it scary, Miss Thompson?" asked a small girl with pigtails. "Very scary," Willow admitted. "But I was lucky that Mr. Alderson heard me and knew how to help. My pa says Mr. Alderson is the best cowboy at Chisholm Ranch," offered a boy of about 8. "He can throw a rope better than anybody." "I'm very grateful for his skill," Willow said with a smile. As the children filed out, Gregory remained behind, looking uncomfortable. When they were alone, he approached her desk. "Miss Thompson," he began, his arrogance temporarily subdued. My father says a gentleman should apologize when he's been rude to a lady." It wasn't much of an apology, but Willow recognized it as the best she was likely to get. "Thank you, Gregory. I accept your apology. I hope we can start fresh this afternoon." He nodded and left quickly, but something in his demeanor had changed. It wasn't respect exactly, not yet, but it was a start. The rest of the week passed in a blur of lessons, getting to know her students and adjusting to life in Chisholm Ranch. By Friday, Willow's ankle was much improved, and Dr. Jenkins pronounced her ready to discard the crutch, though he advised continued care in walking long distances. Saturday dawned bright and clear, perfect weather for Yancy's promised tour. Willow dressed with extra care, choosing a green dress that brought out the color of her eyes and arranging her hair in a style that was neat but not severe. She told herself it was simply because this was her first real outing in her new home, but in her heart, she knew there was more to it. Mabel watched her preparations with a mixture of concern and resignation. "You're determined to go through with this," she observed as Willow pinned her hat in place. "It's just a tour of the area, Mabel," Willow replied, though they both knew it had the potential to be more. "I want to know the land where I'll be living and teaching." At precisely noon, the sound of hoofbeats announced Yancy's arrival. Willow's heart quickened as she watched him through the window, dismounting with the easy grace of a man accustomed to horses. He'd clearly made an effort with his appearance. His clothes were clean and pressed, his dark hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. "Right on time," Mabel said, opening the door before Yancy could knock. "Do come in, Mr. Alderson. Miss Thompson is almost ready." Yancy removed his hat as he entered, nodding politely to Mabel before his gaze found Willow. Something flickered in his eyes, appreciation, perhaps, or something warmer. "Miss Thompson," he greeted her. "You're looking well. How's the ankle?" "Much improved, thank you," she replied, suddenly shy under his steady gaze. "I've brought a gentle mount for you," he said. "Mare named Daisy. She's steady as they come, good for someone who might not have ridden much." "I grew up on a farm," Willow informed him with a slight smile. "I've been riding since I was a child, though it's been some time." "All the better," he replied, returning her smile. "Daisy will be pleased to have an experienced rider." Mabel cleared her throat. "I expect you'll have her back before dark, Mr. Alderson." "Yes, madam," he confirmed. "Just a tour of the nearby countryside. We'll be within sight of town most of the time." This seemed to satisfy Mabel, though she still looked concerned as she watched them leave. Daisy proved to be exactly as advertised, a gentle sorrel mare with a smooth gait that was kind to Willow's healing ankle. As they rode side by side out of town, Willow felt a sense of freedom she hadn't experienced in years. The open country spread before them, painted in the golds and browns of late autumn, with distant mountains rising purple against the sky. "Where are we heading?" she asked, relaxing into the rhythm of the horse's movement. "Thought I'd show you the valley first," Yancy replied. "It's where most of the ranch's cattle graze in the winter months. Then maybe up to Eagle Point, best view in the territory." They rode at a leisurely pace, Yancy pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of the area's history. He was an easy companion, neither pushing for conversation nor letting silences grow awkward. Willow found herself relaxing in his company, sharing stories of her own past her childhood on a small Kansas farm, her determination to become a teacher despite her parents' doubts, her struggles to be taken seriously in a world that judged her first by her appearance. "Is that why you came to Chisholm Ranch?" Yancy asked as they paused to let the horses drink from a small stream. "To escape judgment," Willow considered the question. "Partly," she admitted. "I thought a smaller community might see me for who I am rather than what I look like. Though after meeting Walter Prentice, I'm not so sure." Yancy snorted. "Prentice is a special kind of fool. Don't judge the whole town by him." "His son made sure the entire class knew about my rescue," Willow said. Asked if it was true I had to be pulled out with a rope because I was too fat to climb. Yancy's expression darkened. "That boy needs a lesson in manners." "He got one," Willow assured him, "though not the kind you're thinking." I confirmed the story and told the class what I learned from the experience. Gregory was expecting me to be embarrassed or angry. He didn't know what to do when I wasn't. A slow smile spread across Yancy's face. "You're something special, Willow Thompson." The use of her first name sent a warm flutter through her chest. "It's easier to be brave when you've had years of practice," she said softly. "And when someone has already shown you that your size doesn't define your worth." Their eyes met, and something shifted between them, an acknowledgement of the connection that had begun in that ravine and continued to grow. They rode on to Eagle Point, a rocky outcropping that overlooked the entire valley. Dismounting, they stood side by side, taking in the spectacular view. "It's beautiful," Willow breathed, the vastness of the landscape making her own troubles seem small by comparison. "Yes, it is," Yancy agreed, though when she turned to look at him, he was watching her rather than the view. Something in his gaze made her breath catch. No man had ever looked at her that way before, as if she were beautiful, desirable. She'd grown accustomed to being overlooked or treated with condescension by men, as if her size made her less of a woman somehow. "Yancy," she began, unsure what she wanted to say. "I'd like to call on you properly," he said, the words coming out in a rush. "Not just as a friend showing you around, but as a man calling on a woman he admires, if you'd allow it." The directness of his request took her by surprise. "You admire me?" "From the moment I pulled you up from that ravine," he confirmed. "Your courage, your dignity despite the circumstances, the way you thanked me without shame or false modesty. And everything I've learned about you since only confirms what I suspected then, that you're a remarkable woman, Willow Thompson." She searched his face for any sign of insincerity but found only honest regard. "People will talk," she warned. "They already are. Walter Prentice made insinuations at the school board meeting, and Mabel all but told me I shouldn't get ideas above my station." Yancy's jaw tightened. "Because of your size, as if that has any bearing on the kind of person you are." "That's exactly it," Willow said. "In their eyes, a woman like me should be grateful for any male attention, not selective." "And what do you say to that?" he asked, his voice soft but intense. Willow squared her shoulders. "I say they're wrong. I say my worth isn't measured by my waistline. And I say—" "Yes, I'd like you to call on me, Yancy Alderson." The smile that lit his face made her heart skip. "I'll come by tomorrow after church then, if that suits." "It suits perfectly," she replied, unable to keep from smiling in return. They lingered at Eagle Point, talking as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the horizon. When it was time to leave, Yancy helped her mount Daisy, his hands strong and sure at her waist. The touch sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cooling air. As promised, he returned her to the boarding house before dark. Mabel was waiting on the porch, her expression a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Have a nice ride?" she asked as they approached. "Lovely," Willow replied, unable to keep the happiness from her voice. "Mr. Alderson was kind enough to show me Eagle Point. The view is spectacular." "I'm sure it is," Mabel said, her eyes moving between them speculatively. "Will you join us for supper, Mr. Alderson?" "Thank you, madam, but I should be getting back to the ranch," Yancy declined politely. "Though I'll be calling on Miss Thompson tomorrow, if that's acceptable." Mabel's eyebrows rose. "Calling on her?" "Yes, madam," he confirmed, meeting her gaze steadily. "Properly after church." A silence followed his words, during which Mabel seemed to be measuring him. Finally, she nodded. "Very well. We attend the 11 o'clock service. You're welcome to join us for Sunday dinner afterward." It was as close to approval as they were likely to get, and Willow felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She hadn't realized how much Mabel's opinion mattered to her until that moment. "That would be most kind," Yancy said. "Until tomorrow, then." He tipped his hat to both women before mounting his horse and riding away. As they watched him go, Mabel sighed. "Well, it seems I may have been hasty in my concerns. He certainly seems sincere in his regard." "He is," Willow said confidently. "Yancy Alderson isn't a man who says things he doesn't mean." Mabel patted her arm. "Just be careful, dear. The heart is easily bruised, and you've only known him a week." But as Willow prepared for bed that night, she couldn't help feeling that sometimes a week was enough to recognize something true and lasting when it appeared. The world had taught her to be cautious, to expect disappointment rather than joy, to believe herself unworthy of the kind of love others took for granted. But something in Yancy's straightforward admiration challenged those lessons, made her wonder if perhaps she'd been wrong all along. Sunday dawned clear and mild, perfect autumn weather. The church was packed when Willow arrived with Mabel and the other boarders, and she felt the eyes of the congregation on her as she made her way to a pew. Some gazes were merely curious, others speculative, a few outright disapproving. Walter Prentice was there with his son, seated in the front pew as befitted his status in the community. He turned to watch Willow's progress down the aisle, his lips pursed in what might have been disapproval or simply habitual sourness. Yancy arrived just as the service was about to begin, slipping into the church and taking a seat near the back. He caught Willow's eye briefly, a small smile passing between them before they turned their attention to the minister. The service was familiar and comforting, the hymns and prayers reminding Willow of Sunday mornings in her childhood. When it ended, congregants gathered outside to socialize, the pleasant weather encouraging lingering conversations. Yancy made his way to Willow's side, nodding politely to Mabel. "Ladies, good morning." Before they could respond, Walter Prentice approached, his expression one of calculated concern. "Miss Thompson, how lovely to see you in church. I trust you're settling into our community." "Very well, thank you, Mr. Prentice," Willow replied evenly. His gaze shifted to Yancy. "Alderson, rare to see you in town 2 days running. Something special bringing you in from the ranch." The implication was clear, and Willow felt her cheeks warm. Yancy, however, remained unruffled. "Something special indeed," he agreed pleasantly. "Miss Thompson has kindly allowed me to call on her." Prentice's eyebrows rose. "Has she now? How interesting." His gaze swept over Willow in a way that made her want to shrink into herself, assessing, judgmental, as if trying to understand what Yancy could possibly see in her. "Yes, isn't it?" Mabel interjected, her voice sharp. "Mr. Alderson is joining us for Sunday dinner. Perhaps you and Gregory would like to join us as well." It was a bold move, forcing Prentice to either accept and be civil or decline and reveal his petness. His mouth worked for a moment before he forced a smile. "Another time, perhaps. We have prior engagements. Come, Gregory." He nodded curtly to the group before striding away, his son in tow. "That man," Mabel muttered, "always thinking himself above everyone else." "Pay him no mind," Yancy advised, offering his arm to Willow. "Shall we?" Sunday dinner at the boarding house was a pleasant affair, with Mabel's excellent cooking and conversation that flowed easily. Yancy fit in comfortably, telling stories that made everyone laugh and showing genuine interest in the other boarders' lives and opinions. Afterward, when the meal was cleared away, he and Willow sat on the front porch, enjoying the mild afternoon. They were visible to anyone passing by. Propriety demanded as much, but the rocking chairs were positioned close enough for conversation, without being overheard. "You handled Prentice well," Yancy commented. "Man's been trying to run this town like his private kingdom for years." "Men like him are the same everywhere," Willow replied. "They believe their money gives them the right to judge others, to decide who belongs and who doesn't." "And who do you think belongs in Chisholm Ranch?" he asked, watching her profile as she gazed out at the street. She considered the question. "People who are willing to work hard to help their neighbors, to build something together rather than tearing others down to feel important." She turned to meet his eyes. "People like you, Yancy." His expression softened. "Been here 5 years now. Came with nothing but my horse and the clothes on my back after my father's farm failed in the drought. Chisholm gave me a chance when I needed one." "And now," she asked, "are you content being a cowhand?" A smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Been saving. Got my eye on a piece of land north of town, 100 acres with good water. Another year, maybe two, and I'll have enough to buy it and start my own small ranch." "That's a fine ambition," Willow said, admiring his determination and foresight. "What about you?" he asked. "Is teaching in Chisholm Ranch what you want long term?" She hadn't allowed herself to think too far ahead. "I want to make a difference in my students' lives. To help them see beyond the boundaries others might set for them based on their circumstances." She paused, then added softly, "And I want to find a place where I'm valued for who I am, not judged for how I look." Yancy's hand found hers, warm and strong. "You found that place, Willow. And that person." The weeks that followed established a pattern. Willow taught during the week, winning over her students with her intelligence, patience, and refusal to allow unkindness in her classroom. Gregory Prentice, after his initial rudeness, developed a grudging respect for her, especially when she recognized and encouraged his talent for mathematics. Yancy called on her every Sunday after church and occasionally on Wednesday evenings as well. They took rides together, weather permitting, exploring the countryside around Chisholm Ranch. Sometimes they simply sat on the boarding house porch, talking until twilight. The town watched their courtship with varying degrees of interest and approval. Some, like Mabel, came to support the match, seeing the genuine affection between them. Others, particularly those in Walter Prentice's social circle, made their disapproval known through pointed remarks and cold shoulders. Willow found she cared less and less about their opinions as her feelings for Yancy deepened. He was everything she'd never dared hope for in a partner: kind, respectful, hardworking, and unwavering in his admiration for her. He never treated her size as an issue to be overlooked or apologized for. It was simply part of who she was, no more defining than the color of her eyes or the sound of her laugh. As Christmas approached, the school prepared for its annual pageant, a tradition that brought the entire community together regardless of personal differences. Willow threw herself into the preparations, helping her students memorize their parts and create simple costumes and props. The evening of the pageant, the schoolhouse was packed with parents, siblings, and townspeople. Even Walter Prentice was there, sitting stiffly in the front row as Gregory prepared to deliver the opening narration. Yancy slipped in just as the performance was about to begin, taking a place at the back where he caught Willow's eye with a smile that made her heart flutter despite the weeks of courtship. The pageant was a success, with even the youngest children remembering their lines and the older ones performing a series of tableaux depicting the nativity story with surprising grace. When it concluded, the audience erupted in applause, and Willow felt a surge of pride in her students and her place in this community. After the performance, as parents collected their children and congratulated each other, Yancy made his way to Willow's side. "That was something special," he said warmly. "You've done wonders with these children in such a short time." "They did all the hard work," she demurred, though his praise pleased her. "Miss Thompson." Walter Prentice's voice interrupted them. He stood nearby with Gregory, who looked uncomfortable but determined. "My son has something he'd like to say." Gregory stepped forward, meeting Willow's eyes directly. "Thank you for giving me the narrator's part, Miss Thompson. Father says my delivery was excellent." "It was," Willow agreed, genuinely pleased by his performance. "You have a natural talent for public speaking, Gregory." The boy straightened, pride evident in his posture. "Father says I might like to study law someday. Would that require good speaking skills?" "Indeed it would," Willow confirmed, "and a sharp mind which you certainly possess." Something shifted in Walter Prentice's expression, not quite warmth, but perhaps a reluctant reassessment. "You've done well with him, Miss Thompson. Perhaps I was hasty in my initial concerns about your methods." It was as close to an apology as a man like Prentice was likely to offer. Willow accepted it with grace. "Thank you, Mr. Prentice. Gregory is a pleasure to teach when he applies himself." After they moved away, Yancy shook his head in amazement. "Never thought I'd see the day when Walter Prentice backed down from a judgment. You've worked miracles in this town, Willow Thompson." "Hardly miracles," she said with a smile. "Just persistence and refusing to let others define me." The schoolhouse emptied gradually, parents and children drifting out into the cold December night. Willow moved around the room, straightening chairs and gathering discarded costume pieces. "Let me help you," Yancy offered, picking up a fallen angel wing made of wire and white cloth. They worked in companionable silence until the room was in order. As Willow prepared to extinguish the lamps, Yancy touched her arm gently. "There's something I'd like to ask you," he said, his voice unusually serious. Willow's heart quickened. "Yes." He took both her hands in his expression earnest. "I've cared for you since the day I pulled you from that ravine. These past months have only deepened those feelings. I love you, Willow Thompson, your kindness, your courage, your determination. I love the way you teach your students to see beyond appearances to what truly matters. I love the woman you are." Tears pricked at Willow's eyes as he continued. "I know it hasn't been long, and maybe this is too soon, but I'm not a man who hesitates when he knows what he wants." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small ring, a simple silver band set with a modest turquoise stone. "This was my mother's. I'd be honored if you'd wear it as my wife." Willow stared at the ring, emotions welling up so powerfully she couldn't speak for a moment. All her life, she'd been told in 100 subtle and not so subtle ways that women like her weren't destined for romance, that she should settle, be grateful for any attention. Yet here was this man, this good, kind, handsome man, offering her his heart without reservation. "Yancy," she finally managed, her voice thick with emotion, "are you certain people will talk? They'll say you could do better, that you're settling." His expression hardened slightly. "Let them talk. They don't know what I know, that you're the finest woman I've ever met, and I'd be the lucky one if you agreed to share my life." A tear slipped down Willow's cheek. "Then yes, I'll marry you, Yancy Alderson." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms for their first kiss, tender and sweet, a promise of the love they would share. They were married on New Year's Day, 1885, in the same church where their courtship had formally begun. The entire town turned out for the wedding, even Walter Prentice, who had gradually shifted from open disapproval to grudging respect, as Willow continued to prove her worth as a teacher. Mabel Foster hosted the reception at her boarding house, the parlor and dining room festooned with evergreen boughs and red ribbons left over from Christmas decorations. Students and their parents brought dishes to share, creating a feast that reflected the community's acceptance of the couple. "Mrs. Alderson," Yancy whispered as they stood receiving congratulations. "I like the sound of that." Willow smiled up at her husband, still marveling that this man was hers. "So do I, Mr. Alderson, so do I." After the reception, Yancy took Willow to the small house he'd been preparing for her, a cozy 2-room structure on the edge of town, closer to the ranch where he worked, but still within walking distance of the school. He'd furnished it simply but comfortably, with a stone fireplace, a sturdy table and chairs, a bookshelf filled with the books Willow had mentioned loving, and a brass bed with a colorful quilt. "It's not much," he said, watching anxiously as she explored their new home, "but it's ours. And someday, when I have enough saved for that land, it's perfect," she interrupted, turning to embrace him. "Absolutely perfect." As winter gave way to spring, Willow and Yancy settled into married life with a joy neither had expected to find. Willow continued teaching, walking to and from the school each day, often meeting Yancy on his way home from the ranch so they could walk together. In April, Yancy received unexpected news the owner of the land he'd been saving to buy was leaving the territory due to poor health and needed to sell quickly. The price he offered was less than Yancy had anticipated, putting ownership within reach sooner than he'd dared hope. "It needs work," he cautioned as they rode out to see the property together. "The cabin's sound but small, and the fencing will need to be rebuilt before we can run cattle." "We'll build it together," Willow said confidently, "just as we're building our life together." By summer, the sale was complete, and they began the work of turning the 100 acres into a working ranch. Yancy continued his job at Chisholm while spending every spare moment on their land. Willow helped when she wasn't teaching, learning skills she'd never imagined needing: mending fences, planting a garden that would sustain them, helping to birth calves from the small herd Yancy had started with his savings. The work was hard but satisfying, and their love deepened through the shared purpose and challenges. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch of their townhouse, planning and dreaming of the future they were building. In late August, as the new school term approached, Willow made a discovery that added a new dimension to their dreams. "Yancy," she said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink, "I have something to tell you." He turned to her, noting the special glow in her eyes. "What is it, love?" She took his hand and placed it on her abdomen, still flat but harboring their secret. "We're going to have a baby, next spring if Dr. Jenkins is correct." Yancy's expression transformed from surprise to wonder to pure joy. He dropped to his knees before her chair, pressing his face against her middle as if he might already hear the tiny heartbeat within. "A baby," he whispered. "Our baby." Willow ran her fingers through his dark hair, tears of happiness spilling down her cheeks. "Are you pleased?" He looked up at her, his own eyes wet. "Pleased? Willow, I'm beyond pleased. I'm the happiest man in the territory, in the whole country." The news of Willow's pregnancy spread quickly through the small community. Most offered genuine congratulations, though a few, including Walter Prentice, seemed surprised that Yancy would want to start a family so soon, especially with the new ranch requiring so much work. "Man's got more obligations than sense," Prentice was overheard saying in the Mercantile. "Ranch not even running properly, wife still teaching, and now a baby on the way." When these comments reached Yancy, he merely smiled. "Prentice wouldn't understand building something with your own two hands," he told Willow, "or the joy of creating a family with the woman you love." As Willow's pregnancy progressed, the school board faced a decision whether to allow her to continue teaching as her condition became obvious. Such matters were usually determined by local standards rather than formal rules, and opinions in Chisholm Ranch were divided. The board called a special meeting in November to discuss the matter. Willow attended, her pregnancy now visible beneath her loosened dresses, Yancy at her side. "The issue before us," Mabel Foster began, having been elected chair of the school board the previous month, "is whether Mrs. Alderson should continue teaching through her confinement or whether we should seek a replacement." Walter Prentice cleared his throat. "While I have come to appreciate Mrs. Alderson's teaching abilities, I must express concern about the example being set for our young people. A woman in her condition, in front of impressionable children." "Mr. Prentice," Mabel interrupted, "are you suggesting that marriage and motherhood are somehow improper subjects for children to be aware of?" "Of course not," Prentice backtracked. "But there's a matter of delicacy to consider. And practicality, the baby is due in what, April? That's before the end of the school term. There would be disruption either way." Other board members expressed similar concerns, though more gently phrased. Willow listened to the discussion with growing dismay. She'd hoped to teach until at least March, giving the board time to find a suitable replacement to finish the term. Finally, she stood to address the group. "I understand your concerns," she began, her voice steady despite her nerves. "And I appreciate the need to consider what's best for the students. I propose a compromise. Allow me to continue teaching until the end of February. By then, I'll have completed most of the curriculum, and a substitute could guide the students through their final examinations." She rested a hand on her rounded abdomen. "As for the example I'm setting, yes, I am showing these children that a woman can be both a dedicated teacher and a wife and mother. I'm demonstrating that life doesn't end with marriage or motherhood, that a woman can continue to contribute to her community while building her family. I believe that's a valuable lesson for both the girls and boys in my classroom." A murmur ran through the room as the board members considered her words. To everyone's surprise, it was Gregory Prentice, seated beside his father as an observer, who spoke next. "Miss Thompson, Mrs. Alderson is the best teacher we've ever had," he stated firmly. "She makes us think, not just memorize. She treats us like we have brains, and none of us care that she's going to have a baby. It's natural, isn't it? Part of life." Walter Prentice stared at his son in astonishment. Gregory had grown and matured under Willow's tutelage, developing confidence and independence of thought that sometimes put him at odds with his father's rigid views. The board voted that evening to allow Willow to continue teaching until the end of February, with a substitute to be hired to complete the term. It was the outcome she'd hoped for, and as she and Yancy walked home through the crisp November night, she felt a deep satisfaction. "You were magnificent," Yancy told her, his arm around her shoulders. "Standing there like a queen telling them how it was going to be." Willow laughed. "Hardly a queen, just a teacher who loves her work and isn't ready to give it up entirely. Will you go back after the baby comes?" She considered the question. "Perhaps, not right away, but someday, when our child is a bit older and if the ranch allows for it." She leaned into his embrace. "For now, I'm looking forward to being a mother and helping you build our ranch." Winter settled over Chisholm Ranch, bringing snow that transformed the landscape into a glittering wonderland. Yancy worked tirelessly, dividing his time between his job at the main ranch and improvements to their own property. The small cabin there was now weathertight and furnished with basics, ready for the day when they would move there permanently. As Christmas approached, Willow prepared for her second school pageant, adapting parts to accommodate students who had grown or developed new interests over the year. The performance was even more successful than the previous years, with Gregory Prentice delivering a moving recitation that brought tears to many eyes, including, to everyone's astonishment, his father's. After the pageant, as the community gathered for refreshments, Walter Prentice approached Willow and Yancy, his expression unusually subdued. "Mrs. Alderson," he began formally, "I owe you an apology. When you first arrived in Chisholm Ranch, I judged you harshly and unfairly. I saw only what I expected to see, not who you truly are." He glanced at his son, who was helping younger children with their cookies and punch. "You've been good for this community, and particularly good for Gregory. He speaks of you with respect I've rarely heard him accord anyone." Willow was speechless for a moment, touched by the unexpected acknowledgement. "Thank you, Mr. Prentice. Your son is a remarkable young man with a bright future. It's been my privilege to teach him." Prentice nodded, then turned to Yancy. "Alderson, I understand you're looking to expand your herd come spring." "That's the plan," Yancy confirmed cautiously, unsure where this was heading. "I have connections with a breeder in Colorado, quality stock, fair prices. If you're interested, I could make an introduction." It was an olive branch, offered awkwardly but sincerely. Yancy recognized it as such and accepted with grace. "I'd appreciate that, Prentice. Thank you." The exchange marked a turning point not just in their personal relationships, but in the community's full acceptance of Willow and Yancy as valued members, rather than curiosities or subjects of gossip. February arrived with bitter cold and heavy snow that sometimes made the walk to school challenging for Willow, now in her 7th month of pregnancy. Yancy insisted on accompanying her on the worst days, making sure she arrived safely before continuing to the ranch. Her students, far from being disturbed by her condition, were fascinated and protective. The older girls took it upon themselves to keep the younger children from bumping into Mrs. Alderson's baby, while the boys competed to carry books or move chairs for her. On her last day of teaching before her maternity leave, the students surprised her with a handmade quilt for the baby, each child having contributed a square with their name embroidered in the corner. Even Gregory Prentice had participated, his square showing remarkable attention to detail for a boy his age. "So you don't forget us," explained little Sarah Miller, the youngest in the class. Tears filled Willow's eyes as she hugged each child in turn. "I could never forget any of you," she assured them. "And I'll be back to visit with the baby, I promise." The substitute teacher, a young woman from Santa Fe with a teaching certificate but limited experience, arrived the following week. Willow spent 2 days helping her understand the curriculum and the particular needs of each student before turning over the classroom with mixed emotions. With her teaching duties concluded, Willow turned her attention to preparing for the baby's arrival. She and Yancy had decided she would remain in their townhouse for the birth and initial weeks afterward, ensuring access to Dr. Jenkins and the support of friends like Mabel Foster. March brought milder weather and the first signs of spring crocuses pushing through the melting snow, buds swelling on tree branches, longer days filled with sunshine and birdsong. Willow's time was filled with sewing baby clothes, preparing the corner of their bedroom that would serve as the nursery, and helping Yancy plan for spring planting and calving on their ranch. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, Yancy's hand resting on her rounded belly as they felt their child move and kick, discussing names and dreaming of the future. "What do you think of Samuel if it's a boy?" Willow suggested one night. "After your father." Yancy's expression softened at the mention of his father, who had passed away 2 years earlier. "I'd like that. And if it's a girl, Elizabeth, perhaps, after my grandmother. She was the one who encouraged my education when everyone else thought it unnecessary for a girl." "Samuel or Elizabeth Alderson," Yancy said, testing the names. "Fine, strong names for our child." April arrived with a riot of wildflowers carpeting the hills around Chisholm Ranch and the promise of new life everywhere. Willow, now in her final weeks of pregnancy, found herself restless and impatient, eager to meet the child who had become the center of their hopes and dreams. The labor began on a perfect spring morning, the air fragrant with the scent of new growth and possibility. Mabel Foster, who had assisted at many births over the years, came to help, along with Dr. Jenkins, who had been alerted at the first signs that the baby was coming. Yancy paced outside for hours, occasionally permitted to enter the bedroom to offer comfort and encouragement to Willow. Her labor was long but uncomplicated, her body proving as strong and capable in childbirth as it had in every other challenge she'd faced. As the sun was setting, casting golden light through the bedroom window, Samuel Thomas Alderson made his entrance into the world with a robust cry that immediately captured his father's heart. A son, Dr. Jenkins announced, placing the swaddled infant in Willow's arms. A fine, healthy boy. Exhausted but radiant, Willow gazed down at their child, a perfect blend of herself and Yancy, with a shock of dark hair in her green eyes. "Hello, Samuel," she whispered. "We've been waiting for you." Yancy sat beside her on the bed, one arm around his wife, the other hand gently touching his son's tiny fingers. "He's magnificent," he said, voice thick with emotion. "Just like his mother." The days that followed were a blur of joy and adjustment as they learned to care for their newborn son. Visitors came bearing gifts and good wishes, Mabel with a hand-knitted blanket, families from the school with casseroles and bread, even Walter Prentice and Gregory with a rocking horse that the boy had helped carve under the guidance of the town's carpenter. "For when he's a bit older," Prentice explained awkwardly, clearly unused to the role of well-wisher rather than critic. "It's beautiful," Willow said sincerely. "Thank you both." By mid-May, Willow felt strong enough to visit the ranch property with baby Samuel. Yancy had been spending every available moment there, preparing for their permanent move later in the summer. The cabin had been expanded with a new room that would serve as Samuel's nursery, and the garden Willow had started the previous year was flourishing under Yancy's care. Standing on the porch with her son in her arms and her husband beside her, Willow surveyed the land that would be their home, the rolling pastures where a small herd of cattle now grazed, the creek that provided clear water, the distant mountains that changed color with the passing hours. "It's really happening, isn't it?" she said softly. "Everything we dreamed of." Yancy's arm tightened around her shoulders. "It is. And it all started with a fall into a ravine and a rescue with a rope." Willow laughed, the sound full and free. "Not the most dignified beginning to a love story." "Maybe not," Yancy agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "But it was ours, and I wouldn't change a single moment of it." As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, they stood together, a family forged through unexpected circumstances, strengthened by challenges overcome, bound by a love that saw beyond appearances to the true worth within. Samuel stirred in Willow's arms, his tiny face turning toward his father's voice. Yancy touched his son's cheek gently. "Welcome home, little one," he murmured. "This is where our story continues." And it did continue, unfolding over the years with all the joy and sorrow, triumph and challenge that life brings. The Alderson ranch prospered under Yancy's careful management and Willow's practical support. Samuel grew into a strong, thoughtful boy with his father's love of the land and his mother's quick intelligence. 2 years after Samuel's birth, they welcomed a daughter, Elizabeth Rose, who from her earliest days showed the same determination that had carried Willow through her life's obstacles. Later came another son, James. Completing their family, Willow eventually returned to teaching, first tutoring neighboring children at the ranch, then taking a position at the new school built closer to the outlying farms. Her reputation as an educator grew throughout the territory, her methods and philosophy influencing a generation of teachers. The story of how she and Yancy met became a family legend, told and retold at gatherings and celebrations. What had once been a source of embarrassment became instead a testament to the beginning of a love that had transformed both their lives. And always, whenever anyone suggested that certain people didn't belong together because of differences in size or background or circumstance, Willow would smile and share her hard-won wisdom. True worth is never measured by appearance, and love sees with clearer eyes than judgment ever could. In the autumn of their lives, with their children grown and grandchildren playing around their feet, Willow and Yancy would sometimes ride to Eagle Point and watch the sunset together. remembering that first tour of the countryside, and the moment they had acknowledged what was growing between them. "Did you ever imagine, that day you found me in the ravine, that we'd end up here?" Willow would ask, her hand finding his as naturally as breathing. And Yancy, his dark hair now silver but his eyes still warm with the same love that had seen beyond society's narrow expectations, would smile and tell her the truth. "From the moment I pulled you up and saw your courage, your dignity despite the circumstances, I knew you were someone special. The someone I'd been waiting for without knowing it. The fact that you were too heavy to climb out of that ravine on your own, that was just the universe's way of making sure our paths crossed. It wasn't the conventional love story that young girls dreamed about. There was no slender damsel in distress, no knight on a white charger. Instead, there was a full-figured woman with determination and heart, a pragmatic cowboy with a rope and a strong horse, and a rescue that became the beginning of a life built on respect, understanding, and love that saw the true person beneath the surface. And in the end, that made it the most beautiful love story of all.